Well, good morning. If you're first time here or haven't been here for a while, we are the third week of a message series on love, lust, dating, and relating. And if you didn't get the little invite card, by the way, today is one of those days that is maybe age appropriate. I'm going to try to keep it as clean as possible. But I think we need to talk about an issue today. And it's an issue today that has impacted or will impact or has continued to impact everyone's life in this room. And so let me give you just a little quick background of where we've been the last few weeks. We've been talking about this idea. It's not about finding the right person, not just about finding the right person in your life. If you're single, this is a series for singles. So if you're not single, you can listen along, but it's primarily for those of you who find yourself single. You know, never been married once, twice, hopefully not 3 times you're out, but, you know, it's primarily for you. And if you haven't been here, we've been talking about, we did a marriage series back last September, and we said at that time, hey, singles, give us a little space, and we're going to come back and do something for you singles, and so now we're doing something for the singles. And, you know, so we've gone out and found some stuff, and I appreciate the feedback I've gotten, and I'm always looking for good stuff to share and to help people's lives. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves today. And today actually it's not about just finding the right person. We've been saying it's also about becoming the right person. And that applies to all of us. Whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're divorced, whether you're a widow or a widower, whether you're a kid, it's really more about who am I becoming? Because if I take care of who am I becoming, then finding the right person, the whole dynamic changes in that. And so today is one of those days that all of us don't look forward to. It's the day of the talk. And you chuckle because you've either been on the receiving end of the talk, or the giving end of the talk, or you've been putting off the giving end of the talk because you really don't want to talk the talk, right? Because it's weird. It's uncomfortable. I mean, you know, and if you had the talk, I never had the talk, but if you had the talk, I had the talk with my boys, and it's sort of this, you know, you look for resources, you look for anything you can do to bring to the table and try to help, because we struggle with this idea. And sometimes around Christianity, our message has been, wrongfully, but our message has been, sex is bad for you. Then you get married, we say, sex is good for you. Bad for you, good for you. Bad, good. I mean, and you're like, what is it? Is it bad or good? It can't be both. And so we get kind of caught up, and we're trying to tell, wait, and well, what do you do with this? And we don't know. And so we just kind of say, just don't do it, or go ask your mom. And today we're going to get into the talk, and I'm going to try to deal as honestly and openly with this, but also as sensitively, because I do see a few children under the age of 21, and so I'm going to try to be there. But I just want you to know, if you need to get up and leave, I'll understand. Just don't slam the door as you leave. Everything will be okay, huh? But before we get into the heart of it, I think before we kind of get into the talk, I think it'd probably be appropriate for us to stop and have just a moment of prayer, all right? So I invite you to pray with me. Father, I just pray today that the words that I speak, the words that people hear, would not only be words from you, but that would be words of hope and direction and encouragement. And even where it may get a little harsh, I pray you remind us again that it comes from you as a message of love. And so I just pray that we enter into this with the idea of your mercy and grace, and also the idea of your care. That you share these things because you really do care about us. Not that you want to take away our fun. I mean, you created this whole topic of sex and sexuality. But with so many things, you put parameters around it. You put parameters about your law of gravity, and we can't bump up against that. And I pray you help us to understand how not to bump up against this. And if you can accomplish that through me, not only will I be thankful, I hope everybody will be thankful in your name. Amen. Well, here's the point, the main point of the day, and it's simply this. Sex is more than just a physical act. And I know our culture kind of says, no, it's just a physical act. It's just a thing we do, and, it's no big deal. You got the hookup or the booty call or the, friends with benefits, whatever we're calling it today. It's just, as long as nobody gets hurt, nobody gets pregnant, nobody gets an STD, and everybody kind of understands it's just about doing it. It's just a physical thing. And all of us need to know that it's more than just a physical act, because I believe all of us intuitively know it's more than just a physical act. We know it, but our culture says, it's just this, go have some fun and do all your kind of stuff and live it up. But I want you to know that sex is more than what you think. I'm pausing because I want that to sink in. Sex is more than what you think. And sex is also more than what you do. It's more than what you think. And it's more than what you do. In fact, if you kind of just, and I'm going to be real honest today, the Bible has an incredible limited amount of information on how to deal with sex. We get this idea from Genesis. Man, woman, you put them together, the two become one. Don't ask me to explain that. But that's what it says. And it's this kind of supernatural, mystical kind of thing that takes place. And it's this picture of not just one, it's become, one. They become this one thing. And if you think about that, that's kind of the totality of what the Bible says. The Bible will go on and give you rules about what to do, what not to do. Stay away from all this stuff. Outside of the Song of Solomon, which is a really steamy part of the Bible, by the way. If you haven't read your Bible in a while, start there. I think it'll get hooked on that stuff. But that's kind of the steamy part. But outside of that, there isn't an incredible amount of information about what do you do with the urges and the hormones and all the stuff and the feelings and the chemistry we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. What do you do with all that stuff? And sadly, there isn't a whole lot. And I don't want to be straight with that. But they're just little snippets. And I think if we can tie some of those snippets together, maybe we can get a better picture of this whole idea that it's more than just a physical act. It's more than what we think. It's more than what we do. In fact, God has designed it as an expression of intimacy. And intimacy is something that we don't hear a lot about in our culture. We kind of keep it surface and shallows and how many hookups can you get and, let's go from here and do this. We're just out having a good time. And we buy into this idea. As single people, I want you to know that this is such a sad thing. We buy into this idea that I can hook up and do all this kind of stuff, and someday I'm going to meet the person of my dreams. And I will fall in love. And all that stuff before will just disappear. And if you believe that, you are mistaken. Because single folks, you need to recognize there are people sitting around you today in this room that believed that thought that's why it was because that's what they had heard. And this powerful thing, and they went and did it, and then they thought, hey, I'll meet the right person. Oh, I met the right person. We've fallen in love, and we've gotten married. And what they thought was the past stays the present every day of their life. And if you can avoid this, singles, I want you to understand, there is unavoidable pain in life. There is stuff that all of us will experience. I mean, you can't avoid a lot of stuff. But there is avoidable pain. And what I'm trying to do through this series is encourage you to avoid the things you can avoid. And if I can, I wish I could save all of you, but I can't. But if I can get a few of you to believe what I'm saying is true, it will save you from so much pain and heartache. Because there's something that happens through this, what we think is just a physical act, something powerful. But all of us know, intuitively, that there's something very fragile about this. I mean, singles, marrieds, all of us. All of us have known people who have experienced how fragile this intimacy thing is, And you may be sitting there thinking, well, come on, Mike. At some point you're going to tell us that all this should be in marriage, and, but we love each other, and we're planning to get married. I can't tell you how many people have told me that, and you know what? Didn't get married. And we've all seen people who have experienced the fragileness of this intimacy, and it's great and wonderful, and then all of a sudden, it's not so great. And it's not so wonderful. And it hurts you. And not only does this sort of fragile thing, and this hooks up. Not only will it hurt you, when and if you find somebody to fall in love with and marry, it will hurt them as well at that time. And then it will be too late. And I don't think my wife's here yet, so I'm going to be open and honest with you all, but don't tell her I said this, all right? I was a technical virgin when I married my wife. And there's a reason I said technical. I don't have to draw any pictures. My mind is a divine virgin by a very specific thing. But the rest of it, not so specific. And at the moments when all those different things happen, I will tell you that I was glad I was in it. But I would tell you I would do anything today to be able to put a magnet to my brain or get close to a radiation machine or something that would just erase my memory on those things. Because I don't think anybody, I'll come back to this, but I don't think anybody in general ever forgets those moments of intimacy. And whether for you were pretty innocent through it, it's a kiss, and that was kind of the totality, or whether you were rounding the bases, maybe you were going for home all the time. It's pretty hard to forget those things. I've never met anybody that can forget all those things, except somebody who did it so many times that they just get sort of all jumbled. But even them, they will say, even though I can't remember all of them, I remember the pain. I remember what happens now because of what happened then. So I'm going to go over to what I think is the most clear passage in all of the Bible that talks about this whole idea of sexuality. And what do we do with it? And how do we wrestle with it? And the context in 1 Corinthians is a letter from Paul that's a response to another letter that came from this little church in Corinth. And we don't have that letter, so we don't know all the questions that happened in that letter. In fact, sometimes Paul is answering. He says, you asked about this, I'm telling you this, and we don't know all the details about that. So it's sort of this mixture of kind of some counsel, some answers, some direction. And we also need to understand today the situation in Corinth. Corinth was this huge cosmopolitan place. It was kind of the happening place. It was a mixture of, Las Vegas and New Orleans and Rio and Bangkok and New York. It was the happening place. And religion was a part of life there, but it was a little bit different religion than you and I kind of think about. They had this stuff called temple prostitutes. Now, those are two words you don't typically think together, right? Church and prostitute, right? So I'm going to try again to be nice about this, but this is what went on there. So the idea was, and it kind of, the Jews had this sort of system that God set up, You've sinned, and what happens when you sin? Something has to die. Something has to die. Yeah, see, you guys are on track. Something has to die. And so you get a lamb, you kill this innocent lamb, you ought to feel bad about that because the lamb didn't do anything, you did something, and now something else has to die. And it's this reminder again that we can't cover for ourselves, and that something always dies when we sin. And so they would take the blood, they would put it in different places to symbolize. We've taken the sin from here, from you, and it's gone off, and now it's been carried a different place. Well, in a lot of the Corinth religion, this idea was sort of taken to a different level. And the way you got rid of your sin was you found a temple prostitute. You had your moments of religious experience with them. And in that process, you passed along your sin to them, and then they carried it along. That's all I'm going to say on that, all right? You need to have that in mind because as Paul gets in the story, it's going to come up. And when we understand that's kind of the process they were doing, and what Paul is trying to argue for and kind of correct them for is he's saying, hey, I think you guys have missed something here, something really important. Because they looked at sex like we look at sex today in our culture. That it's just a physical thing. It's just a hookup, a booty call, a friends with benefit. Again, it's not, nobody's getting hurt to this, as long as everybody comes out the other side, not too much worse for the wear. Everything's cool, we all understood. It was consensual. Paul will say, you're missing a much greater and much deeper reality that happens. So with all that said, let's go over to what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. And he starts off with this amazing statement. He says, I have the right to do anything. He's making a quote here that they had. I have a right to do anything. And that sounds kind of almost modern, doesn't it? I mean, haven't you heard in your life, I have the right to do anything I can't want to? It's my body, you know. My day it was, you know, if it feels good, do it, you know. The old song, you know, if loving you is wrong, I don't want to be right, baby. You know, that whole, you know, kind of, I'm in love and it ought to just flow with it. It's all good, you know. And it makes sense, you know, it's like, you know, we get to be an adult. We say, yeah, I should be able to do it. It's my body now. I can eat junk food in the morning if I want, right? Right? Don't tell me no, it's my body. You know, we kind of go with it. He says, you all have the saying, I have a right to say anything you say. But then he says, but not everything is beneficial. Singles, marrieds, old, because I'm laying you down because you're really tired, young. If we would just believe that statement and live with it as a constant reminder in our minds, our lives would be so much different. If we remind ourselves that not everything is beneficial. I mean, what a powerful statement. When you think about it, not everything is beneficial. And then Paul will describe some of the stuff that they were into that was not beneficial. Don't you know, he says, your bodies are parts of Christ himself. That if you have become a follower of Jesus, this mystical thing kind of takes place, and now you're part of the greater body of Christ. And so all of us, even though we're individuals, are part of this bigger connection. And he says, don't you know that? And as he asks these questions, I don't know whether he's wrestling with these people are really stupid, or they haven't really ever learned this, or they're kind of resistant, but whatever. He's just trying to say, hey, don't you know this? Don't you know that you're part of something greater than yourself? Somebody greater than yourself. Should I take the parts of Christ and join them to a prostitute? And we would expect there's a simple answer to this, right? Our answer would be, thank you. And Paul actually writes it. He says, absolutely not. And I think he writes absolutely not because he's not so sure they've got this. Because they might be thinking, well, buddy, join up there, you know, well, it's kind of what we do around here, and is it really that bad? It's just a physical thing. Come on, Paul, you know. So he says, no, I'm not going to get you straight. Don't you know? Absolutely not. Then he says, don't you know that anyone who joins with a prostitute, and when he says joins there, he means joins there, all right, becomes one body with the prostitute. And I have to imagine the people that are reading Paul's letter are going, no, Paul, you got this all wrong. There ain't no joining here. There's no joining. There's no connecting. In fact, the word means cementing. There's no cementing together. No, Paul. This is just two ships passing in the night that happened to dock, you know, close to it. But that's about it, you know. We have gone and, you know, I don't even know the temple prostitute's name. You know, it's just a thing we do. It's just a physical act. Paul, there is no joining. There's no connecting. There's nothing going on. This is a one-time, well, this is a once-a-month thing, but I don't have any connection kind of stuff. And Paul says, listen, don't you know? Don't you know that when you join with somebody, that you literally join with them? That always freaks me out. There's a piece of you that gets stuck to them. Because this word join means, don't you know that you cement yourself, that there's some stickiness there. And a piece of you stays with them, and a piece of them stays with you. And you all know that if you've ever gone down this trail, you know that's true. Because you know every time you've ever hooked up or gotten to certain base or whatever the thing in your mind is, or where you've sort of passed that line of, you know, whatever that line is, you know those things have stuck in your life. And he says, listen, for it is written in the Bible, in the scriptures, over in Genesis, the two will become one body. Now, again, don't ask me to explain that. I can't explain how two become one, but it is a biblical idea. It's a thing from God, and God is trying to explain something deeper than just two kind of physical things become one kind of physical thing. He's saying this is much deeper than just an act. This is much deeper than just, hey, you know, no, nobody's getting hurt out of this. This is something that affects us at such a deep level that really changes how we look at life. And then he makes this incredible statement. So, run away from, flee sexual sin. Now, I don't know what picture you get when you think of somebody running away and fleeing. To me, it doesn't sound like a very macho kind of thing, masculine kind of thing to do, right? You're going to stand. We're going to fight the battle, right? Get the willpower up. Do the right thing. And Paul says, no. You run screaming and running away like a little child. And that's the picture you got to have. Because nobody is strong enough to stand up. That's why he says run away from it. If we could get the strength and strong enough to do this, he would say stand strong. Stand strong in the faith. He says, you turn and you run screaming. Out of the place. You get out of there. Once that pilot light gets lit, there ain't no putting that fire out. So run. Flee for your life. In fact, it says, keep on running. It's the actual in the Greek there. Keep on running. It's not just run a little ways away and stop. It's run and run and run. Well, they're still running, That ought to tell us how strong the pull of it is. And we all know how strong the pull is. That's why he says, you run. Flee from sexual sin. And then he makes an incredible statement. It's so insightful, and it's so scary. Every other sin people do is outside their bodies. That's a pretty exclusive statement, isn't it? Every other sin is outside your body. But those who sin sexually, and he talks about in chapter 7 that he's talking about sex outside of marriage. Those who sin sexually sin against their own bodies. That when you do that, you're hurting yourself. And you may think, come on, Mike, that's crazy. I'm not hurting. In fact, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. There's no hurting here. I'm having a great time. And he says, you don't get it. You don't get it. That there is something special, something that we can't quite figure out and define. That's why we wrestle with it so much. To sin against their bodies. See, sexual sin is like no other sin. And it's not like no other sin because God hates it worse than anything else. It isn't that if you do it, he's going to condemn you forever and ever, that you can't find forgiveness for it. That's not what makes it so different. In fact, we would expect God, if this is so different, to warn us of this, right? Because he cares about us. To say, I don't want you falling because it is not like no other sin. And I want you to write this down. There is no such thing as safe sex outside of marriage. Write it down. I better see some pens moving. I got all day today, We need to know that. Because we have been convinced by our culture it's safe as long as nobody gets hurt, nobody gets pregnant, nobody gets an STD, everybody's cool with it, it's all fine. But according to God's own word, he says, there is no such thing as safe sex outside of marriage. Because of the connections, because of what happens then and what happens later and how it gets drug along in life. See, the reason sexual sin is in a category all its own is not God's reaction. It's the way we react. It's not in God's response that says, oh, bad, oh, bad, oh, bad, oh, bad, oh, really bad back there in the corner, because, that's not God's thing. It's about what happens in here and in here. It's not God's response, and he says, this is the worst thing you do. It's our response. And how it really can be the worst thing we can do. There is nobody that when they stand at that altar, looking to the love of their life, who at that moment wants to bring up their whole backstory. When you meet somebody, you want to fall in love and have this connection, this intimacy. And intimacy is about, the romance, but it's more than romance. It's about love, but it's about more than love. It's about connection, but it's about more than connection. It's about this oneness and this togetherness and this idea to know and to be known. And this whole stuff kind of gets wrapped up in there. And if your story has a bunch of blanks that have been filled in, that all comes along. That all gets dragged up. And that's why we're listen, if sin is only physical, then why? Here's some questions I was listening this week, and one of the resources I've used for this whole series, and I thought they put it in a great way. They said, just think about this for a second. If this sexual sin is only physical, then why, and I want to be very sensitive about this, and I'm not casting any part in the people I'm going to talk about, but I'm just saying, when sex happens, why is it that a child that has been abused and molested carries that with them for the rest of their life. Why can't they just brush it off and say, it's no big deal? It was like when I was playing with my brother's older friends. We were playing tag football, and somebody got a little hard and knocked me down and made me cry. And David cried, boo boo, ah. But it was just a physical thing, and so you brush off, and you get back in the game. Why is it that if this was only physical, why does that stuff hang on? And if this is only physical, why is it as hard as it for a woman to come forward when they've been physically abused, when they've been assaulted? But women are dramatically, the percentages are unbelievable. How many times women will report assault over how many times they'll report rape? And if it's just physical, why does that matter? What's the difference there? See, we know intrinsically this is true, but we don't want to believe it's true because we just want it to be physical so we can have the good time and have the feelings and all the stuff. I mean, why is it that a lot of people's biggest area of sensitivity, biggest regrets in life are sexual by nature? If it's just physical. It's not just physical, is it? And we know this. But we don't want to know this. Because we don't like the idea that we can't kind of follow this all and, kind of flow with it all. But everything in our culture works to detach and decouple sex from intimacy. Our whole system is about shallow. It's about, having a good time. It's about the chemistry. It's about, feeling good. It's about sowing your wild oats. We have all these great sayings about that. Do this, do that. It's just boys would be boys. We have all these things that sort of wipe it all away. But what happens when you can't wipe it all away? It really should scare us. And this is not a scared straight episode today. And my goal is not so much to scare you, because I think fear is a terrible, terrible, terrible long-term motivator for people's life. Notice I did say long-term. Very effective in short-term. But this whole issue of grappling with our sexuality is a long-term issue. Let's get back to Paul. Because he hasn't done yet. He said, listen, don't you know that your body is the temple for the Holy Spirit, who is in you and is given to you by God? Don't you know that you are a church building? Everybody take their hands and go like this. And go like this. Yeah, there you go. It's the only thing I remember from ever going to church with my grandmother, right? Here's the church. Here's the open up. Well, the people are gone in mine. You got people in yours? Oh, you got people in it. All right. It's a childhood thing, but it's a reminder. When you do that, you're literally showing that, you're right, my body is the temple of God. And Paul is saying this not to say, you bad people. He's saying, don't you recognize how special you are? How special you are as your total person, as your body that's part of who you are. It's not just your soul and your spirit and all the stuff inside, your brains and your feelings. It's about the whole package. Don't you know that you're special enough that God has decided to literally come and live in you, to put His life in you, to be that one thing with you? He goes on and says, so, you don't belong to yourselves because you were bought by God for a price. If you're a believer in Jesus, if you're a Christian, if you're not, it's a whole other topic, but the topic still comes home, that this is still all true. But as a Christian, you need to recognize that you're not your own. And that's good news and bad news for some of us. But you are not your own. You were bought with a price, a huge price. But think about what that price, what that cost for God does for you. And his final conclusion, so honor God with your bodies. And that would be my appeal to all of us today. Singles and marrieds. To honor God with your body. From this day forward, to make that your decision. I'm going to honor God with my body. Now, I'm going to throw in a couple extra tips here this morning. Not because there's anything in the Bible that says about it, because again, the Bible has very little to talk about other than don't, run, flee, all that kind of stuff. But let me talk a little about how this idea of how to flee, all right? You ready for this? Here we go. We're going to go through these pretty quick. Number one, remember that what you do today shows up tomorrow. That what you do today shows up. I mean, it's the biblical thing. Over in Galatians, Paul will write and say, listen, folks, you can't pull one over on God in this. What you plant is the crop you get later. And he says that's what we need to be mindful of, you know. What you plant today will show up tomorrow. And I can assure you, singles, trust me on this. You may be planting lots of wild oats out there, but when they come up, and when you find that special someone and you want to be, oh, it's all going to be my past, all that stuff will still be there. And just be mindful that what you do today really does show up tomorrow. Second thing, know where you want to be before you are. You know, it's this idea of where do I want to be this weekend after a big Saturday night? You know, where do I want to be on Sunday morning or Monday morning or Tuesday morning? Now and then, where do I want to be? Where do I want to be when maybe if I do fall in love and find the right person because I've become the right person and everything works out great when I'm standing at the altar, and especially in the months and years after that? Where do I want to be with that person? What do I want my story, my backstory to be? Thirdly, stay vertical. This is probably a physics thing. I'm no physics. I'm not real smart, but there is something about staying vertical. Horizontal, not so good. Vertical? Okay? No more details than that. All right. Don't feed the animal. You ever go to the zoo with your parents, you know, and they had little signs, don't feed the animals? You know why they tell you that, right? It's so that you don't have any fun. No, it's not. It's because if you feed the animals, they get used to you getting fed, and then they don't want to eat their regular food. They want to eat what you're giving them. We talked about this specifically last week. If you didn't hear it, you need to go online and hear it, all right? Because what you feed yourself is what grows in your life. So you need to be careful about what you feed and how it all kind of comes out. Now, my goal today is not to condemn anybody. I don't want anybody leaving here feeling terrible because they look at me and saying, Mike, you know, I've done so much stuff to this point that I might as well just keep doing it because it's just too late for me. Because it's never too late for anybody. And I want to leave you with a little bit of hope. So I'm going to go over to John chapter 8 and tell you this story. And it's about this woman who gets caught in the very act of adultery. So it's clear that what she did was, I mean, she was in the act, and they grab her, and they drag her out, and they bring her and throw her down in front of Jesus. And they look at Jesus, and they say, I'm not going to read too much. They say they get her there, and they literally make her stand in the midst of this whole crowd. Jesus is teaching a bunch of people about something else. They bring this woman, they kind of throw her out there. She's standing there. And you can imagine the kind of shame she feels at that moment. She probably has a bed sheet around her because she's been caught in the act. And as she stands there with all the shame, and I have to imagine she's sobbing and she's feeling all these emotions and terrible, and it's the last place she wants to be because she's with these Pharisees, these religious people, and she's with Jesus. She's heard about Jesus, and it's just like, this can't end well. And they look at Jesus and they say, listen, Jesus, Moses says we need to stone this kind of person. We need to kill her. Get her out of the camp because she's bad. What she's doing will influence other people. And so they say, Jesus, oops, what do you say? And John will tell us that, you know, they're using this as a trap. They're trying to kind of set Jesus up. You know, they're glad they found this woman, but it gives them an opportunity to kind of put Jesus on the spot. What are we going to do, Jesus? You know, you're the so mighty and high, holy and high. Give us your answer. And if you know the story, Jesus doesn't give him an answer. He just he gets down on his knee, and he begins to write in the dirt there, which has to tick them off. You know, you ever want somebody to give you an answer and they won't give you an answer? It just irritates you, doesn't it? And so he's writing, and they begin to keep asking, hey, come on, Jesus, what are you doing? Quit, you know, dinking around there. Tell us. There's no question here. She's caught in adultery. She will admit it. I mean, look at how she's undressed here. I mean, she was caught in the very act. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so Jesus keeps kind of writing. And he stands up and he says these simple words. If any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. And I have to imagine, for just a moment, they think, yeah, baby. And then they stop to think for just a moment. Because Jesus goes back and ignores them. And they're hoping to engage him and get him in trouble. And he has just gone down and begins to write again in the dirt. And there's this incredible line that says, at this, as he's writing again in the dirt, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first. Now, we have no idea what Jesus is writing in the dirt. Anything would be speculation. I don't know if he's writing words, he's drawing pictures, but whatever he's doing communicates to them something in their life that reminds them that they are not without sin. As high and holy as they want to feel about themselves, as good as they want to feel, they aren't. And his point to them is simple. You brought this woman here to shame her, to hold her up as a public example. How would you feel if we did that to you? So they move. And then by the oldest leaving first, the younger sort of have to follow because... And then Jesus makes this incredible statement. He's the only one left, and this woman's still standing there, got to be sobbing, her head down, tears. She may just literally be able to feel their presence leave. I don't know. But then Jesus asks this incredible thing. Woman, and that's a very nice, it's not woman kind of thing. It's a caring thing back in their culture. Woman, where are they? Where are the people that condemned you? And I want you to know today, if you have a past that you feel like you're condemned because of all that stuff, that I don't condemn you, that this church doesn't condemn you, that God doesn't condemn you. Because God loves you too much to point his finger at you and say you are bad, 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 bad. I want you to know that today can be different from tomorrow and from yesterday. And she says to him, as she finally kind of gets enough strength to look around the room and say, there's no one. And Jesus makes this incredible statement. Neither do I condemn you. It's not about pointing out your past failures or even your current failures. It's about you knowing that God really does love you. That he really does care about you. And that's why he says this whole thing about how sexual sin is so different from all others. Because he knows what it does to all of us. He knows the pain that it brings. He knows the way it sticks to us, the way we can never shake it loose. And if we can either stop or never begin, that won't just bring our smile to his face. It will be a blessing to you. He doesn't say go now and leave your life of sin, but that's the end of it. That's not the focus. And I've heard this passage read so many times and said that's the focus. It's on the don't go sin anymore. What Jesus is doing is saying and giving her freedom to go and not have to go that way anymore. So with that said, I want you to write down just two more things. Or write down one more thing and listen to something else. You can't undo the past. And you know that. You can't undo the past, but you can do the future. And today, I want to put that invitation. I just want you to simply to do the future from this point forward, all right? I want you to believe what God said is true. And as hard as that is, I want you to know that saying no to that stuff now is simply investment in not just tomorrow, but as an investment in when you do sort of meet the right person because you've become the right person, that you can stand there and say, I made a decision at this point in life to flee, to run away from that stuff so that I could stand at this moment with you and be as right as I could be. I couldn't change the past, but I can do the future. And you do that by taking the step of faith. Faith, and this is sort of an adaptation from Martin Luther King Jr. Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole path. And I know that the idea of what that looks like and what that will mean if you go home today and say, hey, sweetie, guess what? Guess what I heard at church today? We're not doing this anymore. And you think what that's going to look like and how it's going to complicate life and it's going to make things worse and worse and worse and worse. But I want you to know that you may not see the whole path, but I encourage you to take that faith step today, to make that very first step. And allow God to walk with you. Allow Jesus to walk with you each step going forward, right?